Participatory governance and community resilience. The aim of this lecture is to understand the nature of participatory governance and the role of this approach in building resilient community. Participatory governance in the context of resilience integrates citizens, local organizations and institutions into decision-making processes that shape how communities prepare for and respond to crises. Such crises can also involve events caused by natural hazards. It emphasizes shared responsibility, transparency and collaboration to build trust and ensure that solutions reflect real needs. Community-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction focus on using local knowledge, networks and resources to design strategies that are feasible and specific to the territorial context. These approaches strengthen social cohesion and empower communities to work together to address climate challenges. Tools that support inclusive planning and empowerment include participatory mapping platforms, resilience centers, and co-design processes. These tools enable data sharing, foster dialogue, and create space for collaborative problem-solving, ensuring that planning is equitable and solutions are sustainable. For effective spatial planning that integrates ecological principles and applies community-based approaches, three key and complementary dimensions are often emphasized. First, territorial integration and continuity. Planning at different levels must be aligned. Local spatial plans should not contradict regional strategies. On the contrary, higher-level documents should place greater emphasis on current trends, especially those based on nature-based solutions, and create space for further refinement based on local knowledge at lower levels of planning. Second, stakeholder cooperation and a unified communication framework. All actors involved need to understand the nature of risk within the full cycle of prevention, crisis management, damage mitigation, and subsequent recovery. Many entities take part in the planning process: state and local administration, spatial planners, and designers. Their actions must be coordinated and grounded in evidence. Involving additional stakeholders, particularly local communities and the nonprofit sector, is also essential. Closely related is the third dimension: institutional integration, building systems that enable effective communication and data sharing. Without this backbone, even the best designed plans can fail. At this point, technology becomes crucial. Geographic Information Systems, GIS, decision support tools and planning models support data exchange, scenario modeling and informed decision-making. The goal is to build what is often called a spatially integrated infrastructure, a digital backbone connecting data, models and communication tools. It is not only about the data itself, it is also about enabling collaboration and transparency. However, technology alone is not a solution. In times of disaster, it can even become a vulnerable link. Effective integration ultimately depends on governance, legal frameworks, and mutual trust between institutions. Above all, it is built on cooperation across professions and among the community involved. Participatory governance is grounded in decision-making processes that actively involve citizens, civil society actors, and local institutions. By reinforcing principles of transparency, accountability, and shared responsibility, it strengthens public trust and enhances the perceived legitimacy of planning outcomes. Crucially, participatory approaches create space for integrating community experience and local knowledge, enabling planning decisions to be refined and adapted at lower territorial scales. This ensures that development strategies genuinely reflect the actual needs, gaps, capacities, and values as perceived by the affected communities. As a result, the solutions formulated by public authorities become more context-specific, socially inclusive, and environmentally sustainable, significantly increasing their long-term effectiveness and public acceptance. The participatory approach uses structured engagement processes that bring together state institutions, the private sector including non-governmental organizations, local governments, and the local community. It emphasizes mutual learning, equality of status, and joint decision-making. Key challenges include addressing power imbalances, preventing the exclusion of vulnerable groups, and ensuring that collaboration continues beyond the initial planning stages. The future of adaptation planning lies in dynamic, process-oriented approaches that can evolve with changing conditions and progressively build long-term resilience. To achieve long-term effectiveness, adaptation planning must shift from static, one-off plans toward adaptive and iterative processes that can respond to new information, emerging challenges, and evolving community priorities. This includes monitoring social networks and collective action after the formal planning phase, as these social dynamics significantly influence whether agreed measures are carried out and sustained over time. Participatory planning requires a variety of tools and engagement strategies to ensure that the process is inclusive and meaningful. First, it involves engaging a diverse range of stakeholders, not only officials and experts, but also community members, NGOs, local businesses, and groups that may not typically have a voice in planning. Public education and outreach help communities understand the issues at stake, empowering them to participate more effectively. Open forums and feedback platforms create spaces for dialogue, negotiation, and collaborative decision-making. It's especially important to design targeted strategies for marginalized or vulnerable groups, who are often most affected by climate change but least represented in planning processes. Building trust can also require acknowledging past failures, especially where previous planning efforts excluded communities or caused harm. Participatory governance is essential also in climate adaptation, especially in urban areas where climate impacts directly affect residents, infrastructure, and daily life. Effective participation ensures that decisions reflect the needs of the community, particularly those who are most vulnerable to climate risks. However, meaningful participation requires more than simply gathering feedback. In many cases, decisions are driven primarily by technical experts or political elites, whose priorities may not align with community needs. Participatory approaches can help balance these dynamics by bringing local knowledge, lived experience, and diverse perspectives into decision-making processes. A key challenge is avoiding token participation, where public consultations are conducted but have no real influence on outcomes. For participation to be meaningful, it must lead to concrete actions, shape priorities, and be visibly reflected in final plans and interventions. Ultimately, participatory planning supports fairness, legitimacy, and stronger resilience outcomes. The concept of community resilience assessment is of great importance for designing effective tools. Resilience assessments allow us to measure vulnerability and take targeted action. Resilience is multidimensional. Tools should address social, economic, institutional, physical, and environmental aspects to provide a holistic picture. Community resilience assessments is a key tool in climate change adaptation planning. The increasing frequency and severity of climate-related disasters call for understanding how communities can withstand, respond to, and recover from crises. They help identify which areas or groups are most at risk and effectively prioritize interventions. On the social side, we examine factors such as social networks, community cohesion, safety, and overall well-being, as strong social ties often enable communities to respond and recover more quickly. The built environment is another critical dimension. Assessing vulnerable infrastructure, housing, and public services helps planners understand how physical systems can fail under pressure. Finally, environmental health is key. Resilient communities depend on functioning ecosystems and natural assets such as wetlands, green spaces, or forests that provide protective services, regulate climate, and support livelihoods. When these social, infrastructural, and environmental dimensions are considered together, resilience assessments provide a comprehensive picture that informs effective, evidence-based climate change adaptation planning. When assessing and planning for community resilience, it is important to focus on multiple dimensions. While social and infrastructural factors are often considered, the environmental dimension, including ecosystem health and natural assets, is frequently neglected or insufficiently reflected. Resilience also requires attention to relationships across levels, linking local actions with regional strategies, because local interventions can have broader implications and vice versa. All steps of strategic planning should be connected, from immediate action plans to a long-term vision, ensuring that short-term measures support overarching adaptation goals. We also need to capture temporal dynamics by considering the past, present, and future. This helps us interpret the causes of change, anticipate secondary consequences, and plan more effectively for evolving risks. Given the inherent uncertainties in climate impacts, iterative processes and scenario planning are essential. These approaches allow adaptation strategies to remain flexible, responsive, and robust under different possible scenarios. Finally, using participatory approaches ensures that planning is grounded in local knowledge, reflects community priorities, and fosters ownership and empowerment, which are critical for sustainable resilience outcomes. These three areas represent key pillars of social resilience: the ability of communities to respond to change, overcome crises, and adapt over the long term. Social networks, trust, and cohesion provide the basic structure that connects individuals and groups, facilitates information sharing, and strengthens the willingness to help one another. Access to resources and adaptive capacity determine how quickly and effectively a community can respond to crises, make use of existing resources, and adjust to new conditions. Self-organization, preparedness, and institutional linkages create a bridge between informal local-level activities and formal governance mechanisms, enabling coordinated and sustainable responses to challenges. We call the approach built on these pillars community-based planning. 3 key tools can be used to build a resilient society: participatory mapping and digital platforms, resilience centers and community design processes, and citizen science, social audits, and co-creation. All represent modern approaches that strengthen community preparedness and resilience. The common elements are the active involvement of citizens, sharing data and knowledge, and creating an integrated view of local challenges. In practice, these tools help to better understand territorial needs, build trust between stakeholders, and support solutions that are locally anchored, practical, and sustainable. Participatory mapping allows residents to share local knowledge, identify problems, risks, or opportunities directly on the map. Digital platforms such as Ushahidi, crisis mapping, or Maptionnaire, participatory map-based surveys, serve as structured channels for bottom-up data collection. Through these tools, residents can identify areas with poor accessibility, zones with heavy traffic, places without basic services, or places sensitive in terms of environmental security, risk of natural hazards. They can also report urgent needs during crises or identify places suitable for adding green infrastructure. This information is essential for both emergency response and long-term spatial planning. Resilience centers are physical spaces, community centers, libraries, schools, that serve the community in normal times for common purposes, e.g., organizing lectures, roundtables, etc., and provide support during crises, offering information, shelter, materials, or coordinating volunteers. A good example is Barcelona, where public buildings were designated as climate shelters during heat waves. These centers provide cooling, water, and basic assistance to residents during extreme heat. Citizen science, social audits, and co-design processes rely on collaboration between citizens to collect data, monitor public services, or create proposals. The aim is to increase transparency, strengthen institutional accountability, and create solutions that meet real needs. This approach works well for monitoring urban heat islands, collecting data on watercourses or biodiversity, and assessing the availability and quality of services. Residents can also propose preventive measures to protect vulnerable groups, and the results can serve as a basis for municipal decision-making. Examples of good practice in the area of social networks, trust, and cohesion include the creation of local WhatsApp or Facebook groups for rapid information sharing, which can act as information hubs during service outages or emergencies. In many municipalities, such mechanisms already exist, but they cannot operate in isolation. It is also important to create conditions for regular community meetings, joint activities, and targeted connections between different groups, such as seniors and youth, entrepreneurs and volunteers, or parents, through local projects. In terms of resource access and adaptive capacity, recommended measures include the development of shared spaces for knowledge exchange, community gardens, libraries, co-working spaces. Equally important is the mapping of resources and skills within a broader regional context, spanning several municipalities. This involves identifying human, material, and informational resources, such as who has specialized skills, first aid, technical knowledge, where supplies are located, who owns relevant equipment, and who can provide assistance. These maps can then serve as a basis for crisis scenarios and adaptive planning, meaning the preparation of several contingency plans for hypothetical situations such as extreme weather, disruption of energy or water supplies, or infrastructure failure. At the same time, each area has its own specific issues that also need to be mapped and addressed through tailored crisis scenarios. In the context of self-organization, preparedness, and institutional linkages, examples of good practice include coordination platforms between communities and institutions, joint working groups, roundtables, and other activities aimed at data sharing and discussing scenarios related to potential threats. This slide summarizes the key best practices identified in the research. The core principle is co-creation, ensuring that knowledge from local communities, managers, and planners is integrated from the start. A dashboard in participatory planning is a visual tool that brings together key information needed for decision-making in one place. It usually displays maps, indicators, datasets, timelines, or progress updates in a simple, interactive format. The purpose is to help different stakeholders, citizens, local authorities, experts, and community groups understand the situation, compare options, track progress, and make informed decisions together. Dashboards make complex information easier to grasp, support transparency, and give all participants a shared reference point during discussions. They also help monitor how agreed actions are being implemented over time, which strengthens accountability and supports adaptive, evidence-based planning. Low-code GIS platforms play a crucial role by making digital tools more accessible and allowing rapid iteration. A strong emphasis is placed on integrating heterogeneous data and presenting it in a way that is transparent and easy to understand, especially for non-technical users. Finally, iterative development and scenario-based analysis help ensure that the dashboard remains relevant, adaptable, and decision-ready. This slide presents the key characteristics of the Camerino case study, which illustrates how a dashboard can support participatory planning in a small historic town facing complex resilience challenges. Camerino is a historic hilltop settlement in central Italy, known for its extensive cultural heritage. Its traditional urban fabric, while valuable, also makes the town highly vulnerable to seismic hazards. This vulnerability was dramatically confirmed during the 2016-2017 earthquake sequence, which caused severe structural damage and long-term social and economic disruption. Before the dashboard was developed, Camerino had a large but fragmented collection of resilience-related documentation, engineering reports, hazard analyses, community surveys, cultural heritage assessments, and recovery plans. Although this information was valuable, it was dispersed across multiple institutions and difficult for stakeholders to use in an integrated way. The dashboard was therefore created as a central visual platform that brings together key datasets and representations, including earthquake impact scenarios, the vulnerability of historic buildings and public spaces, and proposed strategies for resilience and post-disaster recovery. The development process involved local authorities, cultural heritage specialists, risk analysts, and community representatives, ensuring that the tool reflected both expert knowledge and local priorities. As a result, the project produced a functional prototype that significantly improves shared understanding of risks, enhances communication among stakeholders, and supports strategic urban resilience planning. The Camerino dashboard demonstrates how digital tools can bridge information gaps, facilitate collaborative decision-making, and contribute to more coherent long-term recovery strategies. Urban resilience requires integrating ecological, social, and governance perspectives. Effective strategies combine participatory governance, social capital, ecological restoration, digital tools, and justice-oriented planning to enhance adaptive capacity and long-term sustainability. Urban resilience increasingly relies on participatory governance rather than top-down models. Local knowledge, social networks, and community organizations provide critical insights for disaster risk reduction. Co-management aligns institutional capacities with community knowledge, enabling effective responses to climate change and urbanization. Social capital reinforces resilience, trust, cohesion, and local capacity building enhance preparedness, response, and recovery. Resident involvement throughout planning fosters ownership and supports sustainable resilience gains. Community-led ecological restoration reduces flood, drought, and other risks while delivering socioeconomic benefits. Resilience is shaped by spatial and infrastructure inequalities. Equitable access to transport, emergency services, and green spaces is essential. Digital tools like GIS, remote sensing, and AI enhance fine-grained vulnerability assessments, supporting targeted preparedness and effective resource allocation. Marginalized communities often face higher exposure to hazards. Resilience strategies must integrate sustainable livelihoods, social safety nets, and protective ecological interventions. Justice-oriented approaches prevent adaptation from reinforcing existing inequalities and strengthen community trust and engagement. Genuine participation ensures local knowledge, values, and priorities shape interventions, improving contextual fit and long-term effectiveness. Engagement must go beyond token consultation. Inclusive recruitment, knowledge exchange, deliberation, and reflective learning foster a holistic approach. Participatory tools, such as mapping and citizen science, integrate grassroots insights into formal planning, revealing vulnerabilities, identifying assets, and strengthening stewardship. Capacity building programs improve climate literacy and develop essential skills, empowering residents to engage actively in resilience planning. Bottom-up campaigns clarify responsibilities, promote sustainable resource use, and support ecological protection. Inclusive participation is crucial for marginalized groups, ensuring equitable reconstruction and community-driven post-disaster planning. Participation enhances procedural justice and technical quality, embedding community engagement at the core of contemporary adaptation strategies. These points highlight several overarching lessons that emerged across the cases and theoretical approaches discussed. Inclusive processes are key to resilient systems. Resilience cannot be achieved through technical measures alone. It depends on diverse perspectives being integrated into planning and decision-making. When processes are inclusive, they reveal local knowledge, contextual nuances, and potential blind spots that top-down approaches often overlook. Inclusivity also helps align different actors around shared goals, making the system more adaptive in the long term. Community engagement builds ownership and social capital. When communities are meaningfully involved, they gain a sense of responsibility for both the process and the outcomes. This strengthens social ties, reinforces trust, and enhances the capacity for collective action, key ingredients for coping with crises and recovering more quickly. Engagement also ensures that strategies reflect lived realities rather than assumptions. Institutional support must be matched with grassroots agency. Effective resilience planning requires strong institutions, but institutional action alone is not enough. Local actors need the autonomy, resources, and voice to influence decisions and implement solutions. When institutional frameworks empower, rather than dominate, grassroots initiatives, the result is a more balanced, robust, and sustainable resilience architecture.